Gonna keep the channel active with these video game vlogs because I don't really feel like making video game videos right now. So let's continue this discussion about I guess games getting easier and how it's a bad thing for games. Specifically, more today, I'm going to talk about fake complexity in games, or perhaps misleading complexity, right? And of course, there's this idea that like a fake, let's go with the fake complexity, a game being fake, complex in a fake way, right? So before I get into this exactly, there's this idea that maybe that games are more popular nowadays, right? Like Street Fighter is more popular because of like this whole games are streamed now and everything, esports or whatever the fuck it's called exactly, right? This is false, right? Street Fighter was way more popular when I was a kid, right? What's different though is that being a nerd is more popular. There's a very big difference. Street Fighter is not more popular. It's that being a nerd is more popular. So, obviously when you want to make money off something, games or whatever it is, of course you want to make a game more accessible in certain ways or add something new to it to bring in a new audience, right? But in fact, making these games easier and everything like that, Street Fighter is not more popular than it was when we were younger. Or if you're old enough, or if you're as old as me, whatever the case, you remember Street Fighter 2 days. Street Fighter 2 in arcades, man, there was a time like I've said this before, going to the arcade as a kid were some of the only good memories I had from my childhood because a lot of bad stuff happened to me, but arcades were crazy, you know what I mean? Just so many people at the arcades watching people play Street Fighter, everyone, not everyone, but lots of people knew what Street Fighter was, right? So I mean, I'm sure you could actually look at the sales of games and see that Street Fighter 2 has sold way more than any of these more complex games, right? Because these new games are complex in a misleading and fake way. So again, the mindset, I think I've said it 3 times now. Even with esports and streaming and everything like that now, it's not that Street Fighter is more popular. Being a nerd is more popular. It's not Street Fighter that's more popular, right? And this gets into more like psychological and like social studies that I talk in other vlogs, but I wanted to get that out of the way. So talking about fake complexity, let's use some examples, right? Um, a game like Jimmy versus Black. I'm gonna keep calling this Jim thing. I'm gonna make this Jimmy thing a fucking meme, right? Jimmy can do one button DPs and Jimmy versus Blaz Blue Cross. Fuck my shit, whatever the fuck that game is called, Persona, whatever, right? But on like a face value, looking at it, you might think that game is just insanely complicated, right? But little Jimmy down the street is just doing as complicated shit as you. Yet Jimmy could probably never do a low forward in a Super Fireball 3 and Super Turbo. Yet Jimmy's game is more complex, supposedly, right? So here's an example I'm going to use of this kind of like misleading complexity of games or whatever, right? So I like old school Street Fighter, whatever. And I remember when Guilty Gear was getting more popular, right? And no doubt, Guilty Gear is an intricate game, and a lot of design choices in Guilty Gear are awesome, actually. I think Guilty Gear, a lot of stuff that more towards years ago was designed very well, right? So one of the arguments that Jimmy's, one of the arguments that little Jimmy's used to make why Guilty Gear was better than Street Fighter, though, would be that they added like a forward. If you know what, hopefully anyone knows what I'm talking about when I talk about Guilty Gear, right? So in Guilty Gear, you have like a forward punch, right? And generally speaking, you have like upper body invincibility, varies from character to character, how long it lasts, whatever the case, but you have these sort of go-to anti-air, right? Sort of, generally speaking, right? Now, some people would say like, oh, that's so complicated. We have characters that all have anti-airs with invincibility and it like functions and like it's like still a normal, but it's an anti-air and we can combo out of it and everything like that, right? So that's a move that was specifically put in the game to have more specific purposes. And I'm not saying that you never want to put in moves to have purposes, because obviously you do. But again, I'll get into more as I go on and on. But so people would say that that's a complicated thing about Guilty Gear. That makes it more complicated the way that you anti-air, and it makes it better, right? But I would actually say that Street Fighter 2 is more complex. Even with Street Fighter 2, with no forward punch moves, with anti-air, air, invincibility, whatever the case, right? I don't want to like ramble on too long because I'm more than comfortable talking about a video game very complicated, right? But I try to keep it general because most people, you can't even keep up with me, right? So let's say I'm just gonna like I wrote down like Ryu's anti-airs. Let's look at a game like Street Fighter 2, a archaic game compared to Guilty Gear, right? A archaic game. Street Fighter 2. Let's look at all of Ryu's anti-airs, right? Technically, you have a shuriken, your DP, anti-air, right? You can actually anti-air with a hurricane kick from certain distances. You can do like little setups to make the opponent jump into a fireball. Speaking of the anti-air, let's just look at Ryu's normals. Stand jab. His stand jab can anti-air certain things, right? I'm actually looking at pictures right now just to make sure I don't miss something, right? So if I'm not looking at the camera, that's why. So stand jab, you know what I mean? Maybe you're like whiffing your stand jab, you know what I mean? Trying to get the opponent to walk into something or to run into something, right? You stand jab, maybe Dawson is like, throwing out normals far away. Old Ryu, much better than new Ryu. Again, intricate difference in that specific matchup. His stand jab is a little bit better, right? Stand strong, right? Ryu is doing a stand strong. Was his stand strong? Do you think that move was put in the game to be an anti-air? But no, because the game was allowed to become its own beast, stand strong, anti-air from certain distances, right? Close, stand fierce. Do you think that move was purposely put in the game to be an anti-air? Do you know what I mean? But again, certain matchups that's better. Let's look at, say, the stand fierce, close stand fierce versus Ryu's close stand roundhouse, right? Normally, you would probably go for Ryu's close stand fierce, right? But say in a certain matchup, right? Say like M. Bison is doing, his double reverse kind of like foot stomp, kind of like shenanigans, right? Because your stand roundhouse has a little bit more hang time, that's probably a better anti-air in that very specific situation, right? We have stand short, stand forward anti-air. We have fucking his sweep, right? Sweep, old school, you sweep as anti-air, not even in games anymore. Let's look at something like, say, we might look at, I don't even need to look at this anymore because hopefully you know what I mean. We might look at a move like Ryu's far stand roundhouse in Super Turbo, and if we were to visually look at that, we'd be like, oh, that's probably a good anti-air with Ryu. But if you actually play the game, Ryu's far stand roundhouse is pretty iffy. There's not many moves or matchups where it's a good anti-air to go versus a good anti-air to air towards doing versus another. Except if we were to think about, again, old Street Fighter, there's ideas of like, trading to win. You know what I mean? Ryu's far stand roundhouse is fast. You know what I mean? It does hit pretty far. So if you actually needed to win and you could trade to win, you might err on the side of doing that versus another anti-air. Even though would it win 100% of the time? You know what I mean? Versus something else? No. But of course, if you were to visually look at it, you might think that, wow, that is probably Ryu's anti-air and normal anti-air in old school Street Fighter, right? But it doesn't really work like that. There's just too many other good anti-airs. And then you have all these fucking, diagonal jump roundhouse, neutral jump roundhouse, diagonal jump medium punch, neutral jump medium punch. You know what I mean? God, I mean, there's things like, again, there's like old school ways you could like scrub out people. Say one, again, an example, right? Say you're versing Vega, right? And there's old school stuff like, you just mash on duck short, you know what I mean? Because it stuffs Vega slide. And then whenever they jump, just jump in the air with your jump strong like a jackass. It's actually more annoying with like an old school Ryu, super Ryu, than versus new Ryu. Of course, new Ryu will get more damage off it, but if we're actually talking about like priority of the move, it's like better in that situation because it has way more hang time as well. Again, whatever the case is, if you were to visually look at these moves, you would say this move is his anti-air, this move is not his anti-air, right? But if you actually play the game, you see the intricate differences. You see that these moves were not put in the game to have this purpose. And because they were not put in there to have this purpose, it's infinitely more interesting. Do you see what I'm saying? So we have a game where, like, say, Guilty Gear, people are like, oh, Guilty Gear is so much better, it's more complicated, you can do so much more stuff. And no doubt, Guilty Gear, especially a lot of the older ones, is, I do think, a good game. And there are many good, complicated things in it, right? But again, one of the Jimmy comments used to be for that is like, oh, it's so great that we have a game where every character can do an anti-air, whatever, right? And it's like, actually, old school Street Fighter, you think it's archaic, but look at all these moves that were not put in the game to be an anti-air that have an anti-air purpose in different specific matchups. So again, if we're now going a step further to a game like Street Fighter V, where you don't even have fucking close normals, it's absolutely Jimmy. It's fucking 100% Jimmy. It's 100% Jimmy, dude. Jimmy's getting down, right? I should probably call it Timmy because of South Park, but for some reason Jimmy just sounds funny to me. If your name is Jimmy, don't take it personally. But so say like Street Fighter V, so many moves were put there with a specific purpose. You will never be able to get that old school Street Fighter because of that. Because the move was put in the game with too specific of a purpose. You know what I mean? They took that out. It's like, no, they're making this game like, man, we really got to fix the frames of this. We really got to work the hitbox of this because we don't want it to do anything else than exactly what we wanted to. And then of course Jimmy ruined it so badly that you have DPs in that game that DPs what you use it to beat other attacks, and they're like, Jimmy's still like, you know what? That's the one move that, I know it has a specific purpose, but it makes me angry. So I'm gonna tell my mom, just fuck up DPs, bro. Anyway, but again, that gets into the fake complexity of games, and then we get into combos again. Again, they want everyone to be able to throw the Hail Mary pass, whatever. You know what I mean? And then these people can't even do a low forward and a super fireball with Rio, right? You have everyone spouting, this is a just frame, this is a just frame. What the fuck is a just frame anymore, dude? You can't even reversal, dude, in an old school game. And you're telling me about your fucking just frame combo. I'm not impressed. Okay. And then say another thing, right? And this gets into the beauty of old Street Fighter in a way, right? Say again, we're talking about misleading complexity here. Think about something like counter hits, right? And I actually see for this specific thing, I see both sides, right? I actually think you could like work your way around this. I don't want to talk too much about how I would make a game, but say counter hits, right? I think counter hit setups are fun, right? Because it's not too bad having moves that are designed to be counter hits. That's okay, right? Counter hits, they do more damage, do more stun. But again, let's talk about the misleading complexity. And again, like old school Street Fighter, there's no counter hits, right? So then we get into the idea of, let's just say again, a common concept of Street Fighter, fireballs and dragon punches, right? So a lot of times to get out of a fireball, dragon punch, trap, whatever you want to call it, right? You have to jump in and hit your attack early, right? Because if you do it late, you're going to get DP'd. But you want to do it late because you want to get your full combo, right? But because there's no counter hit, this of course would be no issue in a newer game. But because you won't get a counter hit even if you punish the fireball, you got to switch up your combo now, right? So say if I just jumped over a fireball and I'm like, man, I'm at this exact distance, and then you actually get into like, well, because I know I'm going to be at this distance, I don't want to do a jump in roundhouse. I want to do a jump in fierce, actually, right? Because you need to like fiddle with the way that you're going to get pushed back, and you can't do this combo, and I got to land, and I got to do this combo instead, right? So again, this is misleading complexity because there are no counter hits, you actually have to do something else, right? So it's a double-edged sword, right? When you're talking about the complexity of games. So I guess that's just kind of like my ramble thought for that, Just want to talk about the misleading complexity of games a little bit, you know what I mean? What makes a game complex? Because a lot of times when people say something is complex, Not necessarily, right? There's a beauty to old school games, right? A lot of games are, again, I use this a game, and I've said it before. It runs the very fine line of being completely scrub a dub and deceptively skillful, and there's a lot of crap, because people know me because of Karnav's Revenge, right? That's a game. On one side, it's completely scrub a dub. On the other side, that game has some very, very complex stuff if you actually play it, right? But and that's the thing. A lot of old school games, there's that complexity, right? And when these games were that more complex, I had a piece of hair in my mouth. I think I just got it again. Fuck. Anyway, long hair problems. um, Games were most popular when they are at perhaps their most visually not they're most visually not as stimulating as new games, and they might seem not as complicated, but there is a complexity in the simpleness of it. Does that make sense? Whereas new games, Jimmy can do everything within reason. I'm not saying new games don't take skill, okay? That's not what I'm saying. Calm yourself. But these new games, even with everyone being able to do stuff, Street Fighter is not as popular as it used to be. The only thing that has changed is that it is more acceptable to be a nerd. There's a big difference. And speaking of this, I just want to say something because I'm talking about fucking Jimmy. Does everyone know how Blanca's real name is supposedly Jimmy? I'm going off on a tangent here, okay? This is a random story. Does everyone know how Blanca's real name is Jimmy, right? Do you guys ever think about how Blanca's ending? Okay, so Blanca's got these fucking like leg, anklet, uh, chains on, right? He's like chains. He's got like little anklet chains, right? Because he's like a savage beast. But do you ever realize in Blanca's ending, his mom realizes that he's Jimmy because he still has the chains on his anklets? And that's one of the things you ever think about. Why the fuck did his mom have Jimmy chained up, right? Maybe Jimmy was a fucking beast. Why the fuck did Jimmy get thrown from the plane in the first place in his ending? Actually, I don't know if that changed in the Street Fighter 2 story. I know Ryu is not the same Ryu that he used to be in Street Fighter 2, but I always thought that was insane as a kid that the mom knew that it was Jimmy, this green fucking beast, because he has the fucking chains around his ankles, because he used to be chained up. So why the fuck did you chain your baby up and throw him from an airplane? That's fucking completely savage, right? I always just thought that's crazy. Why the fuck was Blanca Jimmy chained up in the first place from a baby? Maybe that's why you fucking threw him out of the window because of an airplane because he was a fucking beast. You had to like chain him up. I don't know, dude. Just a random thought. I've never heard anyone say that before. And it's always bothered me. It's like an existential crisis. Why was Jimmy chained up? I don't understand. Why was Jimmy chained up? Anyway, fuck Jimmy. At the end.